So you want to hear about the time I got fired from my dream job in private equity? Great. Stay tuned. In this video, this is a recent talk I gave to some university students about how to break into careers in finance. In this video, I go over specifically how I broke in, how I transitioned to the buy side and got to private equity, but then how everything fell apart and kind of how I recovered from that. Hope you enjoy. Welcome, everybody.
You did it?
Everybody, welcome. We need some muting going on here.
I dealt with this exact scenario.
I'll start muting. No. There we go. Okay. Welcome, everybody. I hope everyone's having a great, what is it, Tuesday? Great week so far. Appreciate all of you coming through. We have kind of two groups here today with us. We have Wayne State University in Wilfrid Laurier up in Canada. So we got some Canadians, some people up in Detroit. We want to make this really interactive. I'm going to basically be going through a presentation that has a little bit of background on myself really quickly. Tells you a little bit about kind of how my career progressed. And then I really want to just go over like more strategy and tactics for people looking to target high finance careers. So specifically investment banking, private equity, hedge fund, trading, asset management, what have you. Happy to answer any specific questions about any of those careers as best as I can. And then from there, we'll just try to make it really interactive so that you guys can get the most out of this rather than me just talking the whole time. But I will spend about 10 minutes real quick. Let me share my screen, see if I can do this. I had it. Go ahead, Amir.
Patrick, before we proceed, just wanted to introduce you to the two people who actually organized this event.
Sure.
Max from Wayne State, and then we have Derek from Laurier.
Hey, Derek, thanks for organizing this. All right, so real quick, let me see if I can open this properly. And can you guys say, oh, I'm even on the screen. Can you guys see this? All right, cool. So we're going to start off real quick. For those of you that don't know who I am, I'm CEO and founder of Wall Street Oasis. I was much younger in this picture. Can you tell I actually had hair? I did 2 years in investment banking, 4 years in private equity at Tailwind Capital. I founded WSO in 2006 to help students like yourself get into careers in finance. And then I did my MBA from Wharton back in 2008 to 2010. And since then, I've been doing Wall Street Oasis full time. And so in terms of
that makes
my
sense.
personal life, I got 3 young kids right now. They're 8, 6, and 5 now. But in terms of what I'm from Boston originally. So for people either Raptors fans or people up in Detroit that are Pistons fans, we can talk trash about that. But basically, it's a little bit about me. In terms of Wall Street Oasis itself, we've been around for over 18 years, helping candidates get dream high finance roles. Had over 200 million visits since inception, over 100,000 people enrolled in our classes. And we had the largest high finance mentor pool in the world with over 1,000 mentors. How I specifically got started, I basically graduated in 2002 from undergrad, basically one of the worst times to graduate. Right after we were heading into recession, right after 9/11. Most of you were not born at that point, or you were just born. Basically on-campus recruiting, I went to a small liberal arts college in Massachusetts called Williams. It already had, it was kind of a semi-target, but it basically went from 130 companies coming on campus down to 30. I did end up getting a decent number of investment banking interviews, but kept striking out over and over and over again. I even made it to a Goldman Sachs Super Day, struck out. They promised me they weren't going to ask me accounting questions. They lied. I was a liberal arts major, and they asked me accounting questions. They asked me to walk through DCF, and I wasn't really that well prepared. And it was pretty eye-opening in terms of how bad I was at the beginning to how much better I got by the end of the process. I did finally break through. Luckily, there was an offer in my future with Rothschild in the New York office. I really believe the reason I landed at Rothschild was not because it was anything special about Rothschild and a match or anything like that. It was just because it was literally the last interview on campus. And so my skills at that point in terms of interviewing were that much better. So I was able to secure an investment banking analyst position. I ended up working in restructuring for 2 years, which in retrospect was actually really good because it was 02 to 04. So there was a ton of deal volume. It was a really kind of difficult time for for M&A and stuff, but for restructuring, we were booming. And so in terms of what I learned, coming from liberal arts, having to suddenly, build 500 capital structure scenarios and knowing the complexities of all these weird debt instruments and negotiating with creditors was actually a great trial by fire for me. Learning curve was very steep. So, what was it like? 80, 100-hour weeks were pretty common for me. But like maybe many of you, banking wasn't what I wanted to do forever. I didn't really know what my next step would be. Luckily, I had another fellow analyst that kind of said to me, what are you thinking of doing after? You should look into private equity. I was like, what's private equity? And back then, there was no Wall Street Oasis. There was no early buy-side recruiting. This was a long time ago, remember? And so luckily, I was able to study enough. I was able to get in touch with enough recruiters to start getting me to processes. And this was me basically blindly jumping to private equity in Boston. I was originally from Boston. I was super excited to get back to my hometown, be near my friends. And I was basically thought I had made it. I made it to Heritage on the buy side. I did my 2 years banking. It's going to be better lifestyle, better pay. And so basically 3 months into my stint at Heritage, it was kind of like a stub bonus time, our first review time. So I go into the room and they're basically like, you're fired. You're fired. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm fired? I just started. Basically, everything had changed. I was abruptly let go within a few months. It was literally supposed to be my first performance review, so I didn't really get a chance to even get my feet wet. I didn't sign the severance agreement because I didn't really know what was going on. And so I think this is an important lesson for all of you out there who think you put your head down, you work hard, everything's going to take care of itself. It doesn't just take care of itself. You need luck. And you need to have you need to do your research. And so I was not aware that this fund was struggling. I mean, I think they really kept it under wraps. But basically what happened is I didn't find out till a year later, but they had a couple bad investments and the investment professionals went from 20 down all the way to 4. I just happened to be the first one out. So I was completely clueless what was going on. And so basically I ended up interviewing. And by that point, I was a pretty good interviewer. I got to final rounds at, I'd say 4 different PE funds in Boston. But every time I'd get to the final rounds, they were like, yeah, this all looks great. You seem like a great fit. They'd get to the reference check. And because I wouldn't sign the severance agreement, Heritage would just say, hey, yeah, he worked here. And that was it. And so it was a huge red flag. They wouldn't hire me, to the point where my own recruiter said to me, I guess it just looks like you've been blackballed from private equity in Boston. And so at that point, anybody here, can anybody guess what actually saved me? What got me a job? What got me back to private equity? Anybody have a guess? Any hands in there? Is anyone guessing? No? No one has any guess.
Feel free to mute.
Yeah, nobody has a guess of what saved me? Come on.
Was it nepotism?
Nepotism? No, I didn't have any family in finance. Good guess, though. My dad was in healthcare. My mom was in education. Wasn't nepotism. MBA? No. Good guess. Connection. It did say connection. Yeah. It really was about the network. So the network was the reason why I even got into private equity in the first place at Heritage. And the network is what saved me and got me a job at Tailwind. Guess who got me the interview first round at Tailwind when I had been unemployed for 3 months? It was another analyst that I'd worked with at Rothschild. That's it. And there was a small group. It was like 12 of us when we started at Rothschild. One got me the Heritage role, or even told me what private equity was. The other one got me the role at Tailwind. And if I didn't have that connection, and if he wasn't able to vouch for me saying, oh yeah, don't worry, Patrick's like a super hard worker. I don't know what's going on over at Heritage, but give him a shot. If he didn't vouch for me there, who knows where I would have been, right? And so Tailwind was great. I worked there for 4 years before going to Wharton. I got deal experience. I wasn't fired after 3 months, so I actually got to learn about private equity, and basically I got to meet CEOs, got to travel around, do some interesting deals. Point being, the experience with Heritage really kind of shaped a lot of like my confidence and what I was doing kind of going forward, to the point where this is kind of the time period where I did create Wall Street Oasis on the side while I was working at Tailwind, because I felt like I should start something. I was never going to be safe again. I was never going to actually, even if I put my head down and worked hard, I wasn't safe from potentially getting fired again if the fund went under. And so I started Wall Street Oasis kind of just because really a lack of confidence and insecurity. And so I was like, I should start something, should do something. And basically banking is the only thing I knew at that time, even though I had only been in PE for like 6 months. And so talked to one of my friends who was at MIT who knew a little coding and got this community set up called iBanking Oasis back in 2006. And so it was called iBanking Oasis for like a year. It ended up kind of growing over the years kind of steadily. Wasn't a real business for a good 5 years until I went to get my MBA at Wharton. But really, our three missions have been the same for all 18 years. We really want to always be the most entertaining and useful finance community in the world. We didn't want to be some boring, just only career-focused site. We wanted to have some fun along with it so that people would actually want to come and visit the community. We wanted to bring transparency where like people, I didn't even know what private equity was. Like what are the different hedge funds? What's a credit fund? What's this? People, what's PE secondaries now? Like people don't know about these careers that are super lucrative and super interesting work. And I wanted there to be kind of more of an open transparency in terms of what different paths were out there. So that was the second main mission. And the last one was really to make sure that it kind of ties in with the access and the transparency, but making sure people with the most, from all backgrounds had access to that information. And so that's kind of how things went. When I was getting my MBA, I really was committed to WSO and building the platform out and trying to make it into a real business. Luckily, I succeeded and was able to kind of go full time in 2010 when I graduated. And then, in terms of our track record, we've placed candidates at all the top banks, elite boutiques, bulge brackets. I know Wilford here, Laurier's pretty big in Big Six. You guys do pretty well. Not as well at the elite bulge brackets and stuff, but hopefully you guys are working towards improving that. But I think overall, it's solidly in the middle market for Canada. But WSO itself, we placed into all the top PE funds as well. In terms of like this part of the talk, I kind of wanted to just quickly talk a little bit about tactics and what we do with our students, because this might be more relevant to kind of where all of you are right now. I know the U.S. recruiting for banking right now has already kicked off for sophomores. In Canada, it's kind of pseudo kicked off, or it's about to start for a lot of the banks. So for all of you second years in Canada, definitely pay attention because this is like you got to have all your ducks in a row kind of as this recruiting season kicks off. So real quick, what do we do? Like how do we break down? What are the key pillars of breaking into high finance? We really think of this in two separate buckets. One is landing as many interviews as you can, getting in as many interview processes. And the second is making sure you convert those interviews into offers. So the first thing, probably the most important where a lot of people struggle is they can't even get the interviews out of the gate. And there's many reasons for that. Some is because low GPA or they go to a non-target school, but even those things can be overcome if you have everything else kind of in a row and you're doing the right things. So crafting credibility, having a sharp resume just out of the gate is really important. Are you quantifying everything? Are you showing the results rather than just talking about responsibilities? Do you have an optimized LinkedIn profile? Are you smiling or are you parting at, and seem like out of it? Or do you look like you're 12 years old? Or do you have a suit, actually look formal? These are things that like people, you'd be shocked. Even our students who come into Academy, like our top program, I'm like, what are you doing? You look like you're smirking. You look like you're smug. Just smile like a normal person. What do you like? You'd be shocked what people have on their LinkedIn. You got to actually like get somebody to like tell you an honest opinion of what you look like and like, do you look professional? And then so like that all plays into like what we call the shell. We want to make sure the shell is super polished. So the resume, the LinkedIn profile, because these are all the things that are going to create those first impressions when you start kind of getting to your networking. We'll get to that in a second. The second thing that really makes a big difference in terms of whether you get pulled for an interview or not is have you branded yourself properly? So for example, if you're going after investment banking, do you have like consulting and private equity the only thing on your resume or experience? Are you not even part of the finance society or club? Have you done any financial modeling? Have you done any internships where there's some valuation or financial modeling work? Like these are all things like that, like in a quick scan of the resume, if you don't have any of those things, it's going to be hard it's going to lower your odds of getting pulled for an interview. And so you obviously, as a first year, it's very hard to get an investment banking internship your freshman summer, for example, or after your first year. But if you can, even if it's at a tiny boutique, I'd rather have that than like a private wealth management role. Private wealth management has kind of been the de facto kind of internship for freshman summers for a long time. But what we do is we have a finance research internship through WSO for the WSO Academy students, just to try and really help brand them. So they're writing articles on high finance topics. They're doing an equity research report, for example. Point being, brand yourself any way you can, whether it's through WSO, whether it's through small boutique equity research shops, even working for free if you can off cycle during the year. Anything you can to brand yourself, it's important, because on the margin, it does make a difference. And then probably number 3, that this pillar right here, which I say is not the most important short term, but the most important long-term determinant of, or most correlated with long-term success, is this third one: networking or relationships. Are you building genuine relationships? Are you being authentic, building meaningful connections with people in the industry? And more importantly, what's your process? What's your process for doing this? And I think the next slide, this is something I like to show, because these are networking funnel profiles. Basically, a lot of people, when they're in high school or they're starting out university, or even sometimes even by senior year, they still haven't figured it out. We call them an amateur in terms of their networking. They're just randomly connecting with some alumni, whatever, on LinkedIn. They're sending some standardized and personal messages. They're following up sometimes, but it's inconsistent and there's no process. So they get some interviews, but it's somewhat limited. There's no system in place. Then as they get better, we kind of move them on. The number of opportunities and interviews you get tends about, go up about 300%, because you're now looking not just at alumni, you're looking at different affinity groups. Maybe you're talking to kids for the Laurier kids here. Maybe you're talking to kids that went to other semi-targets that made it to banking in the U.S. if you want to make it to the U.S., or to Toronto if some of the the RBC TDs of the world, whatever. Point being, like, there's other ways besides alumni to widen the top of your funnel so that more interviews are dropping through to the bottom, right? And so once you start doing this, you start getting on more phone calls, because you're consistently following up. You're not just sending one LinkedIn message and giving up. They're like, oh, they ignored me, they didn't respond. That's like a total loser mentality. You actually have to follow up several times. Anyone knows if they've done sales, you're going to get rejected about 90+% of the time, if not more, if you're cold emailing or cold calling. The same thing with networking. Now, obviously, we want to increase those odds. I'll give you some numbers just really roughly. If you send about 100 LinkedIn connection requests, what do you guys think? How many people do you think actually accept your connection request? Any guesses? You can put it in the chat.
Probably 10.
If you're alumni, actually a little bit higher. Typically about 30 to 40, unless you have a really shitty school that has horrible alumni. So the high end, it's 30 to 40% will accept. It doesn't mean they'll get on the phone with you, but it means about 30 to 40% will actually accept your connection request. So what does that mean? That means if you're setting 100 every single week, you should be getting 30 to 40 new connections. And why does that matter? What are we collecting connections on LinkedIn? Who cares about that? No, the goal is building an actual relationship. So what do you do when you get that connection? Do you just sit there and send them thanks? Hey, yeah, maybe we can chat sometime on the phone. Do you send it over LinkedIn? No, you get it off of LinkedIn, because people don't open their LinkedIn inbox as much as their email. And you have their email once you're a connection. So basically, connect with 30 to 50 people. Try to connect with 100 people, which will lead to 20 to 30 every single week. That's 20 to 30 new emails that you can bring to your email, not your LinkedIn. Okay. And then from there, send an email thanking them for the connection on LinkedIn, and seeing if they're willing to chat in the next 2 weeks. About 97% of the people you send that message to will completely ignore you. But when you follow up a week later and be like, hey, I understood you're super busy. Now, what's this Thursday or Friday work? And then you send another follow-up 3 weeks after that second follow-up. Guess what? About 10% of the people that connected with you, those 30 people, will actually get on a phone with you. So you're going to be having about 3 to 5 phone calls every single week with people in the industry that you're targeting. And that is incredibly powerful. Not short run powerful, but long run powerful. If you keep doing that over and over and over again, how many talks is that? That's 150 phone calls in 1 year. It's literally 150 people. So you're going to be so well connected into the big six, into the top banks in Canada, and even some of the bulge brackets in the US, if that's what you're targeting, or if let's say you're Wayne and you're a complete non-target, right? What are you going to do? Well, guess what? Your affinity group shouldn't just be Wayne alumni, because guess what? Not many are in banking. So you better be going outside that group. You better be looking at other non-targets from the Midwest, other schools in Detroit, other schools. It doesn't matter. Make an excuse to reach out to those people, even if it drops from 40 or 30% down to 15, 20% of people accepting. That's still 15, 20 people you're going to be emailing every week. And so this is something that a lot of people don't like to admit works. because it's a pain to actually do this every single week, every single day. But it's actually not that the connection requests and the emails is actually not that much work. What ends up being a lot of work are the phone calls, right? The 20, 30-minute phone calls a week. It starts being a couple hours a week where you're talking with people in the industry. But guess what? Those calls, you're not just building relationships. You're getting so much value out of it because you're actually improving your interview skills. You're improving your ability to ask good questions and develop conversations. And some people are natural at this. Other people are terrible at it. And they need like 20 to 30 calls before they even get comfortable on one of these like informational interviews. Point being, this makes a massive difference long run in your odds of landing jobs. And this is for any industry. This is not just for banking or high finance. This is for any industry. It's just, the reality is if you want to get into the top firms, you have to be even more, like you have to scale this up to a crazy level, especially from a semi-target or a non-target. So let's keep going. You start landing interviews because you're doing all those 3 pillars before, which seemed like a crazy amount of work, but oh my gosh, we have even more. Now you actually have to perform in the interview. What are you going to do? So if you want to land actual offers, you can't just be networking and have the gift of gab and be the best, you'll get into a bunch of interview processes, but then you'll flame out and get, completely blown out of the water compared to some of the other kids who prepped. So what does that mean? It means you have to be very comfortable with not just the basics on accounting and valuation, but the more advanced M&A and LBO questions. You need to be comfortable telling your story. So the 7 stories is something is a pillar we have where we want all of our students to actually have very specific stories, different types of stories that they can reference when they're asked all these kind of tricky behaviorals, not just like the obvious ones, like why do you want this industry and tell me about yourself, which is like 80% of interviews, 90% of interviews will have that. But the trickier ones, like, what do you do when somebody asks you, what's your biggest regret in life, right? What do you do when they're like, tell me about a time you had a conflict with a superior? Do you just freeze up, or do you have a story you can reference that shows that you're, polished the interview, done the prep, you actually have a story that relates and shows that you're mature, you're a great communicator, and you're a great team player. And so I think doing the work of prepping those stories beforehand and having them ready and polished makes a massive difference in your behavioral interview actual performance. So the practice makes better. This is something we do. We mock like crazy with our students. So we have all of our head mentors basically we have like grading system where we're grading kids on like 5 different categories on behavioral. So not just like why, IB, tell me about yourself, but also authenticity. And then speech. Are you saying like, every 2 words? That's really annoying if you're the interviewer. And they're probably not going to they're not going to want to give you the offer. But if you're super polished, you're confident in your delivery, and you nail the technicals, obviously, it's going to help you land more offers. And then these last 2, actually, this is stuff that education, important for branding. Yes, this helps to become a better financial model, understand the valuation in terms of reinforcing the technicals. But a lot of people, especially that hate the networking part, they'll over-index here and study financial modeling, especially the engineers out there. They'll over-index on this, thinking that, hey, if I just get really good at financial modeling in Excel, suddenly the job's going to be fall into my lap. It's total BS. Like, again, what's the most important thing? If you're not getting interviews, you're not going to be able to show any of your skills. And your actual performance in the behaviorals matters just as much, if not more, than the technicals. So it's kind of like people are more scared of the technicals, so they spend a lot of time there, and they kind of usually neglect the 7 stories, and they think their answers are better than they are. Point being, don't over-index on the education. Yes, it's important to do that, but the skills to land the job are different from the skills of excelling on the job. So I just want to make sure that's clear. And I can expand on that if people are curious what I mean. And then data edge, like where you're talking upperclassmen, people who've gone through the interview process before, or looking at our database or Glassdoor or wherever. Point is, where are you getting interview questions from? Or so you kind of have a sense of what are they going to ask me in the higher review? What are they going to ask me in the first round, super day, that type of stuff. That's all super important. So I do want to open it up to Q&A, but real quick plug for Academy, the ideal candidate we're looking for. If there's any of you in the audience today, high motivation to land a high finance job, time available to stick to the program. So if you feel like, I can only give you a couple hours a week, forget it. We don't want you. We want people who are super motivated, willing to put in the 10 hours a week. Academic and extracurricular activities, like are you a leader on campus, or are you just kind of going to school, getting a high GPA and going home? While a 3.5 GPA in a good university helps, it's not the only criteria to enter the program. We have plenty of non-targets that have had a lot of success with us. If you are interested in coming to the Academy, you can join the waitlist at wallstreetwasers.com/academy. Check that out. Amir, did you send a special link or something to them? Or you're going to?
Yes, we have a special link to skip the waitlist just for
yeah,
this event.
yeah, so since you're attending here, you can use this link and it'll get you to the front of the waitlist so you can actually get into an interview process faster. For sophomores, especially at Wayne, who are in the US, it's probably too late for you guys unless you've been doing a ton of stuff already. For the Canadians, it's very close to too late. That doesn't mean you can't join and you won't get value out of it. It just means like your odds of getting in at this point, if you haven't done any work prior, are not the 90+% that we have on our site that we've been able to place. So the odds of you getting into the program are a little bit lower. I'll just be straight because if you're a freshman, please apply because we love having a full year to work with you because we know we can make a big difference. So that's it in terms of my story, presentation on how to, hopefully it's a little bit of tactics in there for you guys. So yeah, let's talk. Let me unshare this. Go ahead, Kabir.
Hey, Patrick, how are you?
Good,
Thanks
how
for
are you?
coming.
Yeah.
First off, I'd just like to say I am so thankful to Wall Street Oasis. I literally, when I knew nothing about finance, it was there for me, and it's the reason I have all the internships that I do today.
Yeah.
So it's great. So one thing I've been kind of struggling with the networking process is kind of converting like a call into a referral, right? Because on one hand, like that's my ultimate goal, right? Obviously, I want to meet these people, learn about what they do and, you know, their practices and whatnot. But ultimately, I want to get an offer from them or at least a recommendation. But I feel like it's kind of awkward to tackle that subject on a phone call. So I just want to say, like, what's the proper way to ask?
So what year are you, real quick?
I'm a sophomore, but I sort of lost a year/a semester due to some personal circumstances.
Okay.
So I'm graduating in the December of 2026. So I can still recruit next year for investment banking summer analyst.
You get 2 shots. Good. Yeah. So what I would say is you don't need a state. It's obvious. You don't need to be like, hey, can I have a referral from you? I think it's comes across pretty cheesy. I think if you're going out, reaching out and talking to bankers, they know what you're doing. And if they like you and you're asking good questions and you're not overly forceful and you're not rote, what I mean by rote is like, you don't have a list of set questions where you're just like, number 1, what is the culture like at XYZ Bank? Number 2, what is it like? If you're having a conversation like that, they're not going to like you. They're not going to want to pass you on. If you're just having a normal conversation, trying to be, somewhat relatable, talking about, the school and whatnot, then I feel like typically they'll ask you for your CV or your resume near the end, or you can ask, is there anyone else you think that I should be chatting with or that might be helpful for as I kind of approach recruiting this year? So that's usually enough for them to say, well, you know what, send me your CV. I'll try to pass it along or internally. The other thing that happens is if they even get on a phone call with you, oftentimes in the application, they'll ask, did you talk with anybody? And this, so like sometimes just even be able to put their name is helpful in terms of pick for a first round. So it's not for nothing. It's usually
okay.
And by the way, if you do get a first round or a higher view, you should be referencing that phone call. Right. So in terms of like, that's a huge advantage. One of the things we do for our academy students, for example, that I think adds a lot of value is like, so we have 60 head mentors as like the main people that are helping the students through. But when somebody's in a super day, they're like, oh, I have a super day at Houlihan Restructuring, for example. We'll go to our deep roster, find somebody that worked at Houlihan Restructuring, get them on a phone within 24 to 48 hours so that in the super day, I was so lucky enough to talk with Julie Smith, who worked here 5 years ago. And they're like, oh, Julie. It just becomes that much more of a conversation, and your answers to, why restructuring, why this specific firm end up being much better. So same thing with your networking calls, like use them in the actual interview, like reference them, like not crazy, but you can just like, if you've spoken with like 2 or 3 people from the firm before you get into that assessment center or that super day, I think it's a huge advantage.
Okay, thank you. I also do have my second round for the academy coming up this week. So I'm excited for that.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, good stuff that you already made it there. That's a good sign. Okay, Max, go ahead.
Can you talk through the thought process of why you went back to get your MBA after being in investment banking and private equity? And, I know you use it to start Wall Street Oasis. Was that the only motivation, and what benefit did you really get out of it? Because I'm a senior, and that's kind of something I've always bounced around. is, is it worth it? Is it not? Does it depend on the school? All that sort of
Great
stuff.
question. Yeah, great question. For me personally, I didn't necessarily want to get an MBA. I kind of wanted to stay, but I got the hit. I read between the lines from my VP's partners and whatnot that, everyone there that was a partner kind of had their MBA. And so it was like almost like, hey, if you want to keep going, you kind of got to go back to school and get that. And so I got the sense that it's a little bit less common now in terms of like being a required step to get promoted. There are a lot more kind of associates directly getting promoted to like post MBA associate or principal. But some funds still are more traditional like that, and they want to hire from XYZ schools because the branding and the network that it brings. For me personally, I saw it really more as an insurance policy. Because for me, at that point, Wall Street Oasis was very small. It's something I knew I was going to try to do. It would give me cover for a couple of years. And then if it didn't work out, I'd at least have Wharton on the CV and have a good network in terms of being able to get a decent role. So I saw it as kind of like lowering my or increasing or raising my floor, but giving me also the optionality to kind of go for it for, without a full-time job. And I was able to work a lot more on WSO when I was at school than I was full-time. And so I think it really did kind of accelerate the business much faster over those 2 years. So that's kind of how I saw it. I also needed a break, 2 years of banking and then 4 years of PE. I feel like I was ready for a break. So that was another point. It's obviously an expensive break, but one that I think, has value for, like I said, raising that floor. So it protects you in that sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Oh, and in terms of like, should you go, especially what I see from some non-target schools, I see them sometimes tricking their students. I say tricking because I hate this, but like I see sometimes students at like these non-target schools getting convinced to go into these accelerated MBA programs. Please don't do that. Oh my gosh. You're basically like just throwing your optionality away. That you can pull that MBA lever a couple years in. You don't have that lever anymore. Yeah, you have an MBA on your CV, but suddenly you're at an MBA from the same school, non-target, same alumni base. You basically haven't opened up any more or not many more alumni to you. And all you've done is gotten a degree. Like the value of the MBA is not in the education primarily. It's really in the people that you meet. And so going to a non-target MBA because it's an MBA and it's a master's, like nobody cares. They're going to care who you're connected to and stuff like that. So, will it help you? And I'm talking like the high-end jobs here where like people like, you get an MBA for, I saw this happening with a student at, there's a couple students in like a couple schools in like Connecticut that do this or around New York that do this. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, just go work for a few years, even if it's not the ideal job, then go reapply to like, even if it's a top 15 MBA, the 13th ranked MBA, 14th ranked, 15th, that's so much better than your complete non-target MBA, like so much better. It's, the MBA is a really well-established degree. Don't go like to like the 50th ranked one if you can avoid it. And most of you could avoid it if you score high enough on the GMAT and you like get promoted in your first job or two and you work hard. Most of you can avoid like going to a super non-target MBA. Same, and then the MSFs I see for kids that are internationals get completely ripped off thinking, hey, I'm going to go study in the US. I'm going to go get my master's in finance. They're like at Santa Barbara. I saw this for one of our students. I'm like, what school? I'm like, Santa Barbara MSF. Like, what are you doing? Like, she's like, I want to go to banking. I'm like, well, you're not going to get there from where you are. Number one, because you need a visa and you're not at a top school. Number two, like that has no track record at all of placing. And so you just got to be careful about what the schools tell you, especially on the placement stats, because oftentimes it's, they'll say, oh, bulge bracket, and it's like all back office and middle office. Or for the international students, it's like, oh yeah, great placements, and they just combine them all, and then it's like all the top jobs are going to the local kids, and then the international students who do the visa are just completely left out from those. But yeah, just some words of warning. Other questions? Yeah, Danny, go ahead.
Hi, Patrick.
Hey, how are you?
Thanks again for coming. Yeah, I'm a freshman at Laurier, so that was really helpful. I'm just
Cool.
curious. So Laurier's are pretty known for like off-cycle placements, and what I've heard is like it's usually harder to convert these like off-cycle to full-time offers, like just because bigger banks especially, like they usually go to like on-cycle summer students. So
Right.
I'm curious, like, do you have any tips on like how to navigate this, how to like turn an off-cycle into a full-time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it is harder because you're typically doing classes, right? At the same time, so it's not like a full-time experience. I would say um, you don't necessarily have to like. I mean, you can't. Are you talking about like off cycle where you're stopping school like a co-op type
Oh
thing?
yeah, sorry. Yeah, we have co-op, so it's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
winter, fall.
yeah.
Yeah, we start. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that it's really going to be more about like how well are you like internally networking and developing relationships during your time there, in terms of like staying top of mind when it comes time for the summer stuff. And I think Wilford smartly does this because you don't want to be going up against the Rotman Queens kids, like head to head necessarily. And so this is a really nice way that you guys can get that internship on the CV and be more competitive. I think that's probably why you guys are placing so well into like the Big Six. Um, but yeah, it doesn't mean it's going to be easy to get a full time from there. It is true that most of the full times are given to the summer kids, but I still think it's good, especially in your freshman co-op. When's your first co-op? Freshman winter?
Yeah, it depends.
Really?
Like, there's two cycles, but yeah, around there.
Yeah, because if you can do that early, I think that's really valuable. Because it's just going to make your chances once sophomore spring recruiting kicks off to be able to land those interviews and get the traditional summer, right?
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So you should think of the off cycle as really more of like a way just to dramatically increase your odds of landing those super days for
Okay.
for the summer A spots.
Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Yeah. Go ahead, Michael. Hey.
Hi. So I have a question, and so I'm currently a junior, graduating next semester.
Mhm.
Last summer, I had an internship in business valuation at EY,
Yeah.
and I'm going back there this summer as well. And I don't know if I'm necessarily like very interested in like the super high finance careers like investment banking in New York or like private equity at one of these top firms. But I just wanted to see like what your thoughts are on kind of like other career paths in finance that are still, like equally as lucrative and have a lot of great opportunities and networking things, but it's not necessarily like investment banking at, one of these huge global firms.
Yeah. Better like lifestyle pay ratio. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think, well, where you're going is probably a good example of that. Transaction advisory services groups, deal advisory is actually a great place for people who can't directly break into banking that need like a half step before. I call it like a half step towards where you want to go in terms of financial modeling or valuation work. Anywhere where you're doing valuation work, evaluating, businesses, understanding, like learning about industries can potentially lead you to a role where you're making more like critical decisions. And the more you're moving towards making decisions with money, meaning going to the buy side, I think the opportunities for outsized pay increase. Remember, banking is like more sell side. The reason why everyone's going after it, even though it's just an advisor / consulting role for your clients, is because the skill set and the intensity of it is well respected. And so a lot of the buy side firms look to those analysts because they know, hey, I'm not going to have to train these kids. They're going to be hard workers. They're going to know their modeling. They're going to know their valuation. I don't have to train them up. That being said, like if you go to like a valuations stuff, it doesn't mean you can't break into like PE or you can't break into, for example, like a family office. So family offices are one of those things that like, if you know one, you know one. Have you ever heard that? If you know one family office, you only know one. Basically, they're so different. They're all, there's thousands of them, right, all around the world. But you're not going to hear about like an analyst role at a family office that they're hiring because usually they're not like promoting this like on a LinkedIn job post. So how do you ever hear about that role? Well, let's say you've worked for a couple of years at like an E&Y, and you're like, you know what, I want to go to a smaller place, a place that's going to give me a little bit more like a little bit more autonomy in terms of like doing analysis that's not just like, oh, here's a pretty presentation for a client, but it's going to be like, hey, my analysis is getting put to like make a decision on should we allocate X% of the portfolio to private equity, or should we, look at this real estate deal, right? And so like that's where family offices are really interesting because they're so different. You can be given a lot of responsibility really early with a small team managing, sometimes upwards of billions of dollars if you get into the right seat. And so that I think, now of course they're a little bit riskier, right? Because it's like the family decides, yeah, we want to start our own hedge fund. And they're like 2 years later, they're like, actually, we didn't like that. Everyone's fired. So it's a riskier place to go. But after like 2 or 3 years, it might be a good place to. You should be looking at that. And so that's the other reason like networking is so important, and why I say for long-term success, for you to like even know who's working in those places, you have to be talking to a lot of people, and they got to be like, oh, actually, we're looking for an analyst. Like that tends to be what happens is like. When you start talking to people, they'll be like, oh, you should talk to X, Y, and Z. I heard they're looking for somebody now. And so then suddenly, instead of like on LinkedIn, like one click apply where you're up against like 500 to 1,000 people, you're up against like 5 to 10 people that like have been referred into that job. And so that's a kind of long-winded answer of like, there's so many jobs out there that aren't well marketed, that are like in the shadow job market, which are never even put out there. I think the more interesting work and the analytical work, if you're an analytical person, not a salesperson, would be trying to get yourself oriented closer to like investing decisions, whether that's in the hedge fund space, asset management space, whether that's in like family office, private equity, growth equity, VC, whatever, what have you. I think if you're getting closer to that, it's a little more interesting in terms of like actually having your analysis impact decisions. If you like sales and like people and are really like gregarious and don't really like the analytical side of things, I would likely point you closer to like a sales role. So banking might actually be good a long run for you because you're going to be selling to your clients, or going into like a private wealth management if you really love the markets and you love people, right? So like you're going to be helping manage individuals, money, and so like ultra high net worth clients, or just even building up a small book over time. Does that answer?
Awesome. Yeah, no, that was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and then there's like financial analyst roles at like Fortune 500 companies, like FLDP programs, which are great because they're rotational. So like you get to see different divisions of like a large multinational corporation, which I think is pretty cool, because you're going to be learning like, oh, you're going to be like in the accounting group, you're like, I don't want to do that. And then you're going to be like corp dev, M&A, and you'll be like, oh, this is actually really interesting how we're like looking at the industry as a whole and looking at potential targets. So there's a lot out there, man. Once you have the modeling skills, valuation skills, there's a lot of things you could do.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Because like a lot of the clients that we would do work for last summer were like private equity firms or like these super large corporations. And I kind of thought like it was a really nice middle space between like, I'm not sweating my life away at a private equity firm and I'm still like being compensated pretty well, good benefits, good pay, great network at a company like that. So I kind of liked how it was a middle spot. And I just
Guess what, man? That's awesome. And do it. Yeah. Like if that's cool with you and like you want to have a life in your 20s, like that's actually a very reasonable trade-off. That's a very reasonable trade-off that like you need to make, and not look around you and think, oh, what am I doing? Right? Like, yourself. Like if you're going to be happier as a person, like people chasing prestige, money, all this stuff, it's a total empty like pursuit. Like eventually they get to the point, like a lot of them have like midlife crises at like 23 years old. They're in like the office at 4 a.m. Their boss is like screaming or like telling them like fix a footnote in like slide number 167 at like literally 3 or 4. That happened to me at like 4 a.m. Like I was on the phone with like an MD. I'm like, what the hell is going on? Like, why does this matter at all? Like, what is my life? Like, what's the point? You have these like literally these existential things. It's the sleep deprivation. It's the the intensity, the stress of the job. You don't necessarily need that. The only thing I'll say is the advantage of pushing yourself that hard when you're super young is that it does make everything else really much easier. Whether you go to start your own business, like that's the only thing I'll say to you. Like if you're not pushing yourself hard in your work, you should find some area in your life where you're pushing yourself, whether it's fitness, whether it's whatever. Point is like, you don't want to just be static. You want to be healthy and try to be as balanced as you can. That's why I don't think banking is a great place, like long run for in most groups, in most places. It's why most people don't stay. So
awesome. Thank you so much.
Steven.
Hey, Patrick, thanks for taking the time. Just want to say I browse Wall Street Oasis like religiously. So this is pretty awesome. My question is related to PE recruiting for associates. So I'm going to be graduating pretty soon, and now like that's something I'm starting to think about. So as a Canadian, I'm just kind of wondering, have you seen any data relating to like how Canadians can break in and kind of overcome that hurdle of the visa? Or like, is it easier to go from like a Canadian bank to a US bank and then to USPE, or like any just kind of insight on that process?
Yeah, it's interesting. We do have a good number of Canadian students in the academy. I'm not what is it, TN1 or what's it, the TN visa? It's a
TN and like H1B, yeah.
Yeah, the H1B, yeah, going toward trying to get the H1B. It's not like it's hard because the small PE funds, which tend to be the slightly less competitive, more potential ones that you could get, tend to be the ones that are like, there's no way we're sponsoring, right? So it's like almost like the only ones that do sponsor are like these mega funds, which are like going after the only kids at the elite boutiques. Do you have a banking offer already?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. So I think if are you at a good bank like Elite Boutique Bulge Bracket?
I'm at a MS, so yeah, they're pretty good shop in Toronto.
In Toronto, yeah. So if you come in ready and you're kind of networking, like talking to recruiters early, you could potentially get an on-cycle offer at a mega fund, and then I think that I'm pretty sure they sponsor, right? Like they don't care, they just want the best. They just want the best kids. So I think probably best to make sure you're just on the radar of the top recruiters first, and I assume you'd be willing to kind of move down to the US.
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Yeah. So like, I would just make sure you're like, you're at Morgan Stanley, I assume a decent group. So like, I would try to like get on the radar pretty early. When I say top recruiters, it's like, the SG Partners, Oxbridge, the CPI, not CPI, CP, what are they called? Anyway, you can look it up. Even on WSO, there's a whole thread of like who are the top PE recruiters. You may have to a little bit more proactively reach out because you're up in Toronto, but you should try to get on their radar because they'll know like if you're super sharp, high GPA, good school at Morgan Stanley, from like they'll know that like, okay, Steven's really polished and ready to go. You're just gonna have to like be a little bit more proactive than like the kids that are in New York.
Got it. Yep, that's fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah, but like I think it's going to be tough because if you miss out on on-cycle recruiting at the mega funds, it's not as if there's like 50 or 100 other lower middle market PE funds that are suddenly going to sponsor you.
Yeah,
that can catch you. You know what I mean?
Fair enough.
Oh yeah. And then one way to potentially help with that is, let's say you don't get on cycle, trying to make an internal transfer to New York would be probably help your odds. Because then you're around for like the next on cycle where like it's the cocktail hours, all that stuff, where it's a little bit more in person for you.
Got it. Awesome.
Yeah. No worries. Ainsley.
Hi. Yeah. Kind of question similar to Steven, but maybe from an earlier perspective. As a Canadian student, so this isn't super relevant to the other students, but as a Canadian student, kind of in an earlier year, how would you go about or recommend making connections in the US to try to eventually kind of get there? Because especially if you don't have alumni who already have like American placements, it's pretty hard to reach out because they don't know you and they don't really have a reason to talk to you. So what would be kind of your advice for that?
I would just like talk to anybody from Canada that's made it, like honestly, into the industry. Like, yeah, you're not going to get as high a hit rate with people like with the Rotman. I know Rotman places like really well into like Evercore. So like, are they going to be getting on calls with you at the same rate that they're going to with their own alum? Like, no, but they may be willing still to chat with you, especially if you're like, hey, I noticed you made the really difficult jump of, getting to New York or getting to Chicago or whatnot, from Queens or from, Rotman. Like, I'd love to connect, to learn more about, your transition and how that worked out. And you might be surprised, like, it's not like Canadians are probably going to try to help fellow Canadians, and fellow non-targets for all the Wayne State here are going to want to help out fellow non-targets, right? There's still an affinity group there. They still feel like somewhat closer to you than some random kid in the US. So don't think that like you can't or shouldn't reach out to those people that are outside of the alumni base. And then like, there's nothing stopping you from reaching out to women in banking. right?
Yeah, thank you.
Like there's like point is like there's plenty of affinity groups you can reach out to. Are you a freshman? Are you a freshman?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like, oh my gosh, start now. Start now. Like, don't be shy, please. Like, start your networking because it's a massive advantage if you're a freshman. There's so many diversity programs now too for women that help kind of get you into accelerated processes. So if you do start your freshman year, by the time sophomore year rolls around, everyone's going to know you. And it's gonna be like, oh yeah, Ainsley did this. Oh, Ainsley got a bulge bracket this, and she got what do you know? She's suddenly has a bunch of offers, and this played out exactly with one of my mentees. She Grace was at Fordham, which is non-target in New York. The advantage of being in New York was huge, but she started freshman year early, like freshman first semester, and by the time she was a sophomore, it was like she had offers at Citi, she had offers at I think Morgan Stanley, but she ended up in Blackstone Real Estate, so straight into real estate private equity from undergrad, which is like unheard of from Fordham. But it wasn't because she was a genius. It wasn't because she was like the most well-spoken person I've ever heard. It's because she started early, like really early. And so everyone knew her by the time like sophomore recruiting came around. She had already been in all these accelerated things, these women's programs. And so she had like basically she could pick wherever she wanted to go. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful.
Yeah, so like
Thank you so much.
like the most important thing is that like you don't like overthink it and just start actually getting on phone calls with people in the industry as fast as possible, and do it through this whole semester, summer, fall, so that by the time like next spring rolls around in one year or 14 months, you're just like everyone knows you. You have like you talk to like 2 to 3 people at every single bank, you know, in New York, in Chicago, in Toronto, you know, all across the board.
Yeah, no, for sure. That makes a ton of sense. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, no worries. Ethan, go ahead.
Hi there.
Hey.
Yeah, great questions today. And my question is not really regarding finance, but more a little personal to you. So obviously I'm interested in getting into finance, as I'm sure everyone else is here, but I'm also intrigued by your entrepreneurial side for things.
Sure.
So my question is, how did you manage starting Wall Street Oasis while working in PE? Like, what steps did you take to, I wouldn't say make it easier, but I guess make it more effective, or that's the word?
I think there's like a misconception that like entrepreneurs sometimes are like these super risk-taking individuals. It doesn't have to necessarily be like that. You can do a lot of like testing and stuff before you actually jump. Now, remember, I started in 2006. And the business I probably brought in like $5,000 in revenue like that first year, like literally from AdSense or some BS ad plan.
I stayed persistent though. That was good.
Yeah, stayed consistent. And like, well, the beauty was I was still working, so I wasn't relying on anything. There was no funding. I never sold. I never took on investors. So the advantage of that kind of side hustle, slow burn, and the advantage. And one of the things I was saying to Michael earlier, because of like the banking thing. So I remember I was working like 90, 100-hour weeks at Rothschild. When I went to Tailwind, I was working 60. I felt like I was on vacation.
Oh, okay.
I felt I was on vacation. So like, I was like, hey, what do I do with all this free time I have now suddenly? And so I was like, I'll start a business on the side. And so I probably was giving my work 50 to 60 hours. And I was giving the business 15 to 20 on top of that. So I was like really busy. And it was fun, but it wasn't like I was giving the business all of my time, all my dedication. I just loved it. It was fun. And so I think that's a huge advantage because I didn't need funding. It was small. We probably launched it for under like $3,000. Just got it built, something going, and then just started talking about it and promoting it. And I think the huge advantage of that was that I just started. I just did it. We didn't like over plan all this stuff because, if I think back of like what I thought back then, I kind of laugh of like, okay, yeah, we're just gonna put ads on here. And then, I knew nothing about like what the rates were on like ads and like how, even if you had like 1 million page views, it's a joke. You can't run a business on that. Like, 1 million page views is 1,000 CPMs. Guess what you get paid like max on CPM basis? You get like 5 if you're like really good and you're like part of a vertical ad arc. So it's like $5,000 right now. And that's that's revenue. That's not cost. That's not profit. Right. And so like, if you think about it, like looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was so clueless. But the point is I started learning and kind of just, it kept growing kind of steadily bit by bit. But yeah, it was mostly because, I it was kind of a, like, I loved I loved the idea of working for myself and building up something on the side, partly because I think I'd been fired, and like that idea of like having something that was growing on the side that I maybe one day could do was really attractive to me. Just for freedom too, for being able to kind of decide, you know what, I'm going to go, for example, like after business school, I didn't go just move back to Boston. I lived in Argentina for a year and went to Buenos Aires, and I improved my Spanish. And so like that freedom was worth a lot to me. And so even though it was a pay cut, if I'd gone back to private equity, probably would have been making 350, 400,000 right out of business school. Instead, you know, I was probably making 150, 200,000 with the business. So it was like making millions of dollars even when I graduated from my MBA. So it's like, but I valued that freedom. I valued that upside. And I thought, hey, if I give myself my full self to this, I think that in the long run, it's going to be a really positive outcome. And so that's what I did.
It's really great, man. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, but you know, the risk averse thing, like I'm pretty risk averse. I worked in restructuring. I saw these businesses failing. So like, I wasn't going to go just quit my PE job because I had like a couple thousand users and like even 1 million.
Yeah.
Because I was like, well, wait a second, I can't even come close to replacing anywhere near. So that's where kind of business school came in to help me kind of get that ramp to get to become a more real business where I could actually support myself.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So like there's a little bit of misconception, like the common media, they kind of will romanticize the idea of entrepreneurship and going all in and risking everything. And usually your first business is going to fail. I got pretty lucky. I've launched other stuff that's failed miserably. So like, even with knowing what I knew, so like what I'll say is like, it's actually, like, don't let the romanticized version of entrepreneurship kind of lure you into making a unwise risk-adjusted decision. Try to like get as much information as you can before making any sort of leap. Ideally, you can like replace half of your income, so you know you're going to be able to have a much longer runway. And you know, I think that's typically what I like to say is like, can you support yourself where you're at right now? Part-time, have you grown the business to a point where like part-time you could actually support yourself? Yeah, maybe take a hit on your lifestyle, whatnot. If you can answer yes to that, I think it's a pretty good time to jump and then go. If the answer is like, well, no, it's just this idea, I'm like, please do not quit your job. If that makes sense. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, so I wanted to circle back to a little bit from your first response to me. And so you touched a lot on like family offices, and I kind of wanted to like expand on that a little bit, not necessarily like strictly family offices, but just smaller firms where they're not really like advertising their jobs on like LinkedIn or you know, Indeed or whatever very commonly, where maybe they have like a couple hundred associates in their office in whatever city they're at, and how like I can maybe not even necessarily land a job there, just get exposure to these places. And yeah, just overall that process.
Well, I mean, I think that's why LinkedIn's so powerful. LinkedIn's not powerful because you can like flex and like be like, I'm an incoming analyst. Like, who cares about that? Why LinkedIn's great is because you can actually find like these smaller companies, right, that are in the, you know, 10 employees to 200 employee range that like maybe just got a Series C funding or they're growing fast and like people don't know about it. And so that's why like talking to more people is like such a hack, because you're going to be here. Suddenly you're going to talk to an analyst at some place. And they're like, oh my gosh, dude, it's like exploding here. We're growing so fast and the things are like amazing, blah, blah, blah. Suddenly you're going to be like, well, I want to work there, right? It's like going to be common sense, but you're not going to, like, besides the filters you have on LinkedIn in terms of being able to like try and find those specific niches and kind of smallish firms, I don't think there's any like secret way besides just talking to as many people as you can, and asking and like being super curious about like different little sub industries within finance. So like, what do you know about private equity secondaries? Probably not that much, right? And so like that's a perfect example of a place that's absolutely exploding, right? Where a lot of like bankers don't even know about it. They're going in thinking private equity, and like I always like make a joke. I'm like, if just a few of the top people would like, if they looked at like the work-life balance and the potential like growth there, if one of the top people were like, actually, I'm going to go in the direction of secondaries and become like the top person in secondaries, it potentially could be extremely lucrative, maybe a better work-life balance too. So like that's an example of like trying to find specific asset classes that are have tailwinds behind them to be able to kind of position yourself in a area that has a nice growth potential.
That's awesome. Thank you.
And like that's the other thing with like WSO, like just reading the forums too, because you'll start hearing and seeing patterns and hearing things. And you'll be like, what does that even mean? What's a secondary? Why is everyone talking suddenly about private credit, right? For the mega funds, like what about that? And so how would I, what would kind of set me up well there? And so like, that's where I think you can start learning about what they're looking for, talking to people, targeting people in those specific sub industries on LinkedIn to get a few phone calls done and try to learn a little bit more about that. It's like if you approach those calls of like, I always say like the best time to network is when you don't need anything. Like the worst time to network is like right now for sophomores because every single sophomore is networking, trying to get that first round interview. So it's the actual worst time in terms of conversions because people are going to be annoyed. They're tired. They've already talked to 5 kids the past week versus if you already have a job, like let's say this summer comes around, you already have an internship. There's not many people who will keep networking. And like when you already have something, you're not like immediately looking for something right away. And you're actually just having a genuine conversation about like career and all this stuff. That's when you start like hearing a lot of things, patterns, how different people think. You start hearing about like, oh, well, my buddy went to this other startup that does this like, fintech startup or whatever, and it's growing. Or like that's what starts unlocking a lot of opportunities for you. But again, it comes back to just having conversations with people and not thinking that at 20, whatever years old you are, 19, 20, 21, however old you are, not thinking that like you have any sort of good picture of what's out there. Because I know at your age, I thought I knew a lot more than I did. And it's kind of like you just don't know what you don't know. And the only way to kind of start peeling back those kind of like secret little sub industries and niches is to actually just have those phone calls. Because there's no like guide that could ever cover all of the different paths, right? There's rough guidelines they can give you. Be like, oh, you should go to trading because you're like market making, and you should go to this. But like in terms of like specific firms in specific sub industries, what's growing, what's struggling, that's very nuanced and like changes by the year, right? So, yeah, they're the reason why networking is so powerful. Yeah. Yeah, it's actually shocking. Even sometimes people in the academy, like they're Ivy League, high GPA, and they've struggled. And usually I know why. It's because they think it's just going to take care of itself. Everything's going to take care of itself. And they don't like the idea of networking. Why? Why do I have to do this when my GPA is high? I'm a good student. I'm a hard worker. Why? Well, it's because hiring is not a perfect system. Hiring is done by people, right? And people are emotional creatures. They're gonna want to hire people that they like, right? They're gonna want to hire people that they have a relationship with. And so that's why I said don't over-index on the education side of like studying financial modeling and putting your head down and thinking that that's going to get you the job. It's not. The conversations you're going to have with people in the industry is what's going to get you the first round interviews. And then if you're prepared on the technicals and then yes, but like getting that first step is often like a huge gap for people. And they're like, well, I need help on the networking. What do I say? It's like, well, there's certain things you can say. It's like, be a normal human being, but follow up respectfully and making sure you're increasing the gaps of time every time you do a follow-up so you don't piss them off. People are like, well, I can't follow up a third time. I'm like, sure you can if you just wait like 4 weeks. Right? So that's all I'll say. It doesn't mean they're going to get on the phone with you. It's just, that's how you increase your conversions. Go ahead, Nimir.
Patrick, for the students worried about, because we get a lot of this from academic students worried about doing manually following up with each one.
Yeah, so there's software. Yeah, we can talk about some software. Like I do not recommend cold emailing with like a mail merge or anything. I've seen people do that. It's very risky. Very risky. You have one wrong mail merge where like you had the token of first name wrong and it's like, hi, first name, blah, 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 like disaster. Like don't do that. So there is other software that we subscribe our academy students to, but like there's extensions in Chrome, there's extensions in Gmail. There's some called like Boomerang. There's the one we use called Right Inbox. Basically, it allows you to save all your templates inside the email program, so inside the extensions, so that when you're ready, it has automatic reminders and notes as well. So let's say you have let's say Kabir is an analyst at Goldman, and I want to get a job with him. I connected with him. Yeah, I connected with him on LinkedIn. He said yes, luckily. Awesome. So a couple of days later, I'm like, hey Kabir, thanks so much for connecting with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hop on a call sometime in the next few weeks. Would you be free sometime this Thursday or Friday after 3 p.m. Eastern, whatever? He ignores me. What happened? So like that first email was actually a template from inside that's saved inside this extension, this piece of software. So when I'm hitting create new email, putting Kabir's email in there and saying Wilfred Laurier sophomore is like my subject line, right? Or thanks for the connect. If it's not alum, it's like thanks for the connection. And I'm saying, hey Kabir, I would love to hop on a call sometime in the next few weeks. If you could spare the time, with this Thursday or Friday, work after XYZ, whatever time, Eastern. Hope to chat soon. All the best, Patrick. When I hit send, the chain's now started, right? The chain is there. There's an email sent to you. But what do you do with that chain? Like, are you just gonna be like, hey, let me put it in my spreadsheet? Sure, you could put it in a spreadsheet, and then a week later it'll like alert you or whatever, if you would, depending on your conditional formatting, all that stuff. Or you could just have it right in that email chain where you say, in 1 week, pop this to the top of my inbox as unread. And basically what will happen is in 1 week, I can archive that email from Kabir. It's out of mind. I go to the next one. I go to the next one. I go to the next one. Now in 1 week, let's say I did this on Monday. The following Monday, it's going to come to the top. Kabir ignored me. So if he replies, great, I can set up a time. But he ignored me. He's busy. He's on a deal. It pops to the top of my inbox again, right? And so now it's going to see, okay, he didn't respond. I send a second follow-up email. Hey, Kabir, I know you're probably super busy, but would any chance this Wednesday or Friday work after XYZ time, or happy to work around your schedule. Thanks. Hope to chat soon, Patrick. Then what I do, I don't say 1 week follow-up. I'm not going to hit him again in 1 week, but you can be sure I'm going to hit him in 3 weeks. So then I put a 3 week follow-up, and these are going to be standardized like reminders that you put on there in the software. And then when 3 weeks come, and by the way, that second email I sent you, that's also a template. I didn't type that out. I went click, and it populated the email. 3 weeks later, same thing. I have a third template. Click, it populates it. Hey, Kabir, I know we haven't been able to connect. So sorry for the persistence, right? Again, polite apologetics, all that stuff. If you can't get on, totally understand. I know it's a super busy time in recruiting and blah, blah, blah. But if at some point you are able to hop on, and love a chance to pick your brain and learn more about how you did this to this transition from this group to that group, or one from Canada to blah, blah, blah. All the best. Hi, Patrick. Now, if you do those three things, somebody who's connected with you on LinkedIn has already kind of signaled to you that they're a qualified lead, meaning they're more likely to even get on the phone with you, the fact that they even accepted it. So if you now have emailed them 3 times in 3 weeks, remember, one initially thanking them, one week later, and one 3 weeks later, the odds of them getting on the phone call is actually about 10 to 15% from connection requests to this. So you think, oh my gosh, 100 connection requests, only 30 new people connected with me. Well, actually, but 10% of those 30 people will probably get on the phone with you. That's why we're getting to the 3 to 5 people per week. So we want to see. Sorry, go ahead, Kabir.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was awesome advice for like networking and whatnot, because I've been sort of struggling to manage all of that, right? I've been trying to get some CRM software and stuff and to make all of that easier. Yeah. But kind of veering away from that, I'm at the stage of my recruitment process where I've, built up some relationships with people, a lot of shops in Michigan, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like I've gotten to know them really well, and I feel like I have a decent shot at some Michigan firms for 2025 positions. But my end goal is to get to like, a New York or a Chicago and at an elite boutique or a bulge bracket. And I don't know how likely it is that, it will happen after my undergrad. Obviously, I'm not going to give up. But what does sort of lateraling look like from maybe a lower middle market shop to getting to, but without the MBA, to a bulge bracket or an elite boutique?
Yeah, lateral markets are super dependent on macroeconomic like times. So if you're talking 2020 when when 2020, 2021, when deals were like exploding, everyone was lateraling to like top platforms because they were just ripping people out of the boutiques and they were ripping people out of transaction advisory services group. They needed bodies. They needed bodies desperately. So like in that type of market, it's very robust and easy to lateral. In this market, it's very hard. Like there just aren't extra seats, right? They're giving their intern offer rates went from 90+% at a lot of banks all the way down to 70%. Right. And so like they're not even giving full-time offers to the summer analysts. So lateral markets are very sensitive to macroeconomic because if they've already overhired or they're hiring freeze or all this stuff, or they're still laying people off. And like, for example, the inflation number came out hot today. Like if they're not cutting rates now until June, like it looked like for a little while there, it looked like potentially we'd be off to the races this spring if it ends up being more like summer or back half of the year. The latter market may not pick up till then. So I would say like it's going to be depending. Like if you go to a boutique lower middle market bank in Michigan, for example, it's still really good because you're developing the skill sets and you're going to be like in play for any of those like elite boutiques when there is a lateral opening. But it doesn't guarantee you like the timing. Does that make sense? So like you'll probably get into some processes if you're active and continue to talk to people at those firms. But it's like you're going to have to be hovering around the hoop and hearing when they lose an analyst or something. They'll be like, okay, yeah, I could be. We're getting 20 kids in now for this interview process. And so it's tough because it's less competitive in the sense of like you're not going against a bunch of people, but then all the people you're going against typically have that like banking background, right? And so they're going to talk about their deals.
So networking is probably going to matter even more at that stage.
It's going to, well, yeah, it does. It matters before and after, but like it matters simply because you don't want to miss out on any, like there's not as many, like in a weaker market, there's not as many lateral openings. And so when you come open, like you want to be around the hoop, like hearing about it, making sure you're missing out. And so, yeah, and like you could even go like boutique lower middle market in like a Michigan, go to like a lower middle market in New York next, just to be in the area. It makes it easier, right? You just don't want to be hopping every like 6 months and like, you got to be careful.
What do you think about like the international banks that are trying to grow in the US? They're kind of at like the lower stage, but they're, growing really fast. Like I reached out to someone at SMBC in New York.
Yeah.
They're a Japanese bank. They've been growing a lot in the United States and they kind of have like smaller analyst classes. But I feel like, one of the people messaged me through the Wayne State handshake. So I feel like, that I might have a better shot there than like, established banks in the US.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Any places that's like more aggressively hiring, of course, you're going to, especially if you can just get it. The point is like, if you get the interview, the first round interview, you're kind of on the same, no, not a higher view, first round, like in-person interview, like you're on really the same ground as like anybody. And so they're just going to want to hire the best people, with some caveat being, they do want a diverse class. They don't want it just to be all, overrepresented. So like there is, it's not just like who performs the best. It's also like who performs the best, relatively speaking, also with being able to build a diverse analyst class. So I think in that sense, like, absolutely. Yeah. I think your odds are better because they're growing, right? So like they'll be a little more aggressive. The analyst class will be bigger. But you gotta think of like the market more as a whole, because like it just means like if there's such a big gap in terms of like the amount of talent going in here versus the number of open seats, that especially in a rough year, in the last year or so, year and a half, the deal volume has been so low that like there's kind of just this overhang of talent now that's either been fired. Yeah, interns that were at elite boutiques or bulge brackets didn't get a return offer. There's all those kids. Guess where they're going? They're going downstream to the larger markets or these other banks too. So you're competing with those kids. So it's not as if they disappear.
Right.
They're all scrambling too. So not to stress all of you out.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions?
All right, Patrick, I think we call it here.
Yeah, I think we'll call it. Yeah, just for anybody on there, like, at any given time, no matter where you are, the networking side of things, it really matters. I just want to re-emphasize that like 100 times. Like getting good at that is what's going to long run. Like even if you end up at like some back office shit job right out of university, if you actually get really good at networking and you continue doing it throughout your career, like that's really long run what's going to be setting you apart. And so just remember that, because oftentimes people like over-index and over-emphasize like, oh my gosh, I didn't get my top bank or my top, like it's so stupid. It's like this, you're gonna have a 30-year career for you. Like there's gonna be lots of transitions. Some of you may not even want banking. It's funny that sometimes the kids get it and then they're like 6 months in, they're like, what did I do? And so like they work for like 3 years to get there and then they're like, what did I do? Oh my gosh, I don't even like this. And so just keep that in mind, that like if you don't get it, it doesn't mean life's over. It doesn't mean that you can't be very successful, whether it's in another realm of finance, whether it's in a totally different industry. Point being, like in any industry, your relationships are going to really, being good at building relationships and making friends and making connections that are where people have a positive impression of you is a skill set that is can carry you and give you open so many more doors than anything else in your life. And so like that's why I like to talk. I like to really hit that hard for any 19, 20-year-olds, because it's like something that a lot of people don't like to hear, because it's nerve-wracking to get on calls with 30-year-olds and 25-year-olds that are significantly older than you. My point is just like get over it and do it, because it's just a massive game changer for everybody that does get over it earlier. Okay. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. Appreciate Amir. Thanks for arranging this, and for Max, thanks for arranging it. And who was that? Is it Kabir? Were you the one who arranged it, or who? Derek?
Yeah, Derek.
Derek, thank you. Appreciate it. Do you have a question, Derek? You were so quiet.
No, it was all good. Thank you so much for organizing this. It was really great to get involved.
Awesome. Appreciate it. And best of luck to all of you. Amir will send around that link. I think he put it in the chat, but Amir will send something around after. And I think a lot of you guys joined earlier. We have a little gift for some of you, so stay tuned for that too.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. And until next time.